Major developments have emerged in the case of Duane "Keefe D. Davis, the man accused of orchestrating the murder of rap icon Tupac Shakur in the 1990s. Decades later, the former gang leader is behind bars in Las Vegas, insisting that the case against him be dismissed and implicating another music legend. Davis is accused of being involved in one of history's most infamous killings. Tupac Shakur, the 90s rap superstar, was shot while riding in a car with Suge Knight after a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. Despite numerous investigations, Davis has repeatedly implicated himself in the crime, known as Keefe D, spelled variously with two EFs, two E's, or even a Y. He was reportedly the leader of a Crip gang faction in Compton, California, involved in drug trafficking. After serving time in prison for drug charges in the late 90s, Davis became more vocal about his alleged role in Shakur's death. He published a tell-all book titled Compton Street Legend, Notorious Keefe D street-level accounts of Tupac and Biggie murders, death row origins, Suge Knight, Puffy Combs, and crooked cops, and gave interviews describing the events of that fateful night in 1996. According to Davis, he and his entourage attended the Mike Tyson fight, but later in the casino, Shakur attacked Davis's nephew, Orlando Anderson, over a stolen chain. Though the groups initially separated, Davis, Anderson, and others allegedly planned retaliation, targeting Shakur and Knight while they were stopped at a traffic light. In an interview, Davis described being in the front passenger seat of a rented Cadillac, with DeAndre Big Dre Smith and Anderson in the back. Davis claimed Dre was supposed to fire the shots but hesitated and passed the gun to Anderson, who carried out the shooting. Anderson, who always denied being the shooter, was killed a few years later in another incident, while the other passengers, Smith and the driver, Terry Brown, are also deceased. Davis disclosed much of this information to Los Angeles and Las Vegas investigators after becoming a confidential informant in an investigation into Christopher Wallace's Biggie Smalls murder. Arrested in September 2023, 27 years after Shakur's death, Davis has been charged with first-degree murder. He has pleaded not guilty, with his trial set for March, and his legal team has attempted to have the case dismissed. As part of his defense, Davis has pointed to Sean Diddy Combs as the person ultimately responsible for Shakur's death. At the time of Tupac Shakur's death, Sean Puffy Combs was at the beginning of his meteoric rise in the rap industry, having founded Bad Boy Records, now Bad Boy Entertainment, during an era marked by the infamous East Coast versus West Coast feud. This rivalry prominently featured Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight, the leader of Death Row Records, on the West Coast side. Recently, the legal arguments by Duane "Keefe D. Davis's defense team have been revealed in a motion to dismiss the charges against him, citing three main points. The state of Nevada allegedly failed to pursue the charges in a timely manner, delayed for 27 years, lacked corroborating evidence to support what they claim was a coerced confession, and failed to honor a federal proffer agreement between Davis and the United States government, thereby violating his constitutional rights. Davis's defense compared his situation to Bill Cosby's case, where Cosby's conviction was overturned due to a breach of an agreement not to prosecute him after he made incriminating admissions under the impression of immunity. In their filing, Davis's team references interviews from 1998 and 1999, during which Davis denied involvement in Tupac's murder. In a 1998 interview conducted under a proffer agreement, Davis claimed no knowledge of who shot Shakur and speculated that it could have been orchestrated by Compton police under Suge Knight's direction, suggesting that Knight might have been motivated by Shakur's alleged plans to leave Death Row Records. Davis maintained this position, asserting that neither he nor his nephew, Orlando Anderson, were involved. However, Davis acknowledged that Shakur attacked Anderson in Las Vegas the night of the murder, but alleged that retaliation would have occurred later in Compton. Due to the heavy police presence in Las Vegas, the motion also cites that Davis was offered immunity during the investigation into Christopher Wallace's Notorious B.I.G. murder in the early 2000s. According to the filing, a task force investigating Wallace's murder found substantial evidence of Davis's criminal activities as a leader of the Southside Compton Crips, including drug trafficking. In exchange for 3 interviews, Davis was reportedly granted immunity from prosecution, including immunity for his statements related to Tupac Shakur's murder. In a 2008 interview, Davis began making allegations against Sean Puffy Combs, claiming that Combs solicited Davis to kill Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur for $1 million. Davis stated that Eric "Zip" Martin, an associate of Combs, provided him with a gun to carry out the hit. Davis alleged that although Shakur was killed, neither he nor Anderson was ever paid for the job. He speculated that Combs paid Martin, who allegedly kept the money for himself. Davis's evolving statements and alleged agreements with authorities have become central to his defense as his legal team works to discredit the prosecutions case while implicating Combs in the events leading up to Shakur's death. He said much of the same thing in a 2009 interview a year later because, according to the motion to dismiss, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, as far back as 2009, was in possession of the same set of facts that the Clark County District Attorney is now alleging makes Mr. Davis responsible for the murder of Tupac Shakur. The Clark County District Attorney's Office has offered no reason as to why it waited another 14 years to prosecute a case against Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis has been irreversibly prejudiced by this case, and Mr. Davis's constitutional rights have been violated in an extraordinary manner never before witnessed in the annals of the American criminal justice system. Now, of course, there was a response because the prosecutors from Las Vegas called out Davis for being quite dramatic and said he has been telling on himself for decades. So their motion in opposition to the motion to dismiss states that in the years following Shakur's murder, defendant Duane Keefe D Davis confessed to being involved in Shakur's murder in nearly every imaginable form. The defendant confessed to some of his role in Shakur's murder during an interview with LVMPD Homicide in 2009. Defendant admitted to seeking a deadly confrontation with Knight and Shakur in interviews with the producers of Death Row Chronicles in 2017. The defendant recounted his involvement in Shakur's murder in his book published in 2019, and the defendant has gleefully claimed responsibility for the murder of Shakur in numerous YouTube interviews from 2019 up until his arrest. The prosecution then addressed the issue of immunity from prosecution. Well, maybe he's admitting everything because he thinks he's immune. They have a response to that. The defendant asserts that he's received immunity from prosecution in this case. The defendant has provided absolutely no proof that transactional immunity was ever conveyed by any prosecuting authority. The defendant has provided no federal court order conveying immunity, nor any California court order conveying immunity. However, even if he had such a grant, they couldn't possibly cover his criminal liability in Nevada. The defendant also claims that his proffer in 1998, in his statement to Detective Long, somehow created immunity for the crime, as the court and the legal community used proffer to describe a contractual relationship between an interviewee and a prosecuting authority. Essentially, a proffer agreement allows for statements made under the terms by the interviewee to not be used against that person. The state does not seek to utilize the 1998 proffer session against the defendant, and has no idea what the terms of such an agreement were between him and the federal government before he entered his plea. The report seems to reflect that this was a standard proffer, where a criminal defendant is interviewed about his knowledge of all possible criminal subjects he may have information about before he is allowed to enter his plea. While he doesn't refer to the proffer agreement with a USA agent, the terms of that agreement are known. The defendant was specifically informed that this agreement was between him and the federal government. Moreover, the agreement is limited to a single date and time. It allows for the statements to be utilized in cross-examination of the defendant if he ever testifies differently. Finally, the agreement is limited by its express terms. Nothing in that agreement suggests the defendant has immunity from any criminal charges. Notwithstanding, it appears to only apply by its express terms to an interview on December 1st, 2008. Certainly, the defendant is free to litigate the admissibility of the December 18th, 2008 statement. However, case law establishes that the defendant's mistake of fact about its admissibility, particularly where he had a lawyer present who knows the specific terms of the agreement, would not lead to suppression of the statement, meaning it can't be excluded from evidence. On Tuesday, Clark County District Court Judge Carly Kearney agreed with the prosecution, saying Davis has provided no proof that he had any immunity deals. And we're going to expect to hear in the next few days if Davis's legal team plans to appeal that decision to the state Supreme Court. Remember, going back to Cosby, it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that ultimately determined that his conviction should be vacated because he had entered into an immunity agreement. So we shall see what happens. Davis says he eventually became a confidential informant to a task force that was investigating the murder of Biggie Smalls, who was Shakur's main rival at Bad Boy Records in New York. Know that Biggie Smalls was actually gunned down in Los Angeles, but prosecutors countered Davis's claims by saying there's no proof of any kind of immunity offer here, and that even if Davis had been offered some protection from prosecution in California or the federal court system, that wouldn't apply to his case in Nevada. And the judge agreed, opting not to dismiss the case and denying the defense's motion. One of the most interesting things to come out of that motion to dismiss, though, is how many times Davis has talked about Puff Daddy over the years, the disgraced rapper and music mogul we've been focusing on a lot here on Sidebar, currently in a detention center on federal charges of sex trafficking, racketeering, and prostitution, heading to trial in May. But I want to talk about what Davis has to say about him, what he has to say about, I should say, Puffy, one of the many monikers Combs has adopted over the years, and that's how he refers to him in this filing. Combs started his meteoric rise in the early 90s, founding Bad Boy Records, now Bad Boy Entertainment, in New York. There was the big East Coast-West Coast beef, Death Row versus Bad Boy, and Davis says that Combs used that as an excuse to put a hit, an assassination order on Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. So let's take a look at what Davis had to say about Combs and a little note about this. Davis has told many versions of his story to BCE over the years, changing some details, leaving others out, so take that with a grain of salt regarding his credibility. Sometimes he'd admit things, sometimes deny them again, just take that for what it is. In fact, I'll also tell you the state talks about that in their opposition to the motion to dismiss, which says that on December 18th, 2008, the defendant was interviewed by task force officers at his lawyer's office. This interview was secretly recorded by LAPD Det, William Hull. During this interview, the defendant confessed in detail about his involvement in the murder of Tupac Shakur, consistent with his book and subsequent YouTube statements. And what Davis revealed in an interview with the Art of Dialogue YouTube channel in 2021 is that his nephew, Orlando Anderson, shot Shakur from the backseat of the rented Cadillac. But during an interview with the FBI in 1999, Davis apparently said something completely different, according to the FBI report, which was included in the motion to dismiss. Anderson was not involved in the shooting death of Tupac Shakur, and neither Davis nor his group killed Shakur or Christopher Wallace, aka Notorious B.I.G. Davis, does not know who killed the two rap stars. He believes that either individuals from New York associated with Puffy Combs or individuals associated with Death Row Records could have killed Shakur, and that individuals associated with Death Row Records killed Wallace. So again, changing stories. And by the way, Davis goes on to say that he was introduced to Combs in the early 90s by a man named Eric Zip Martin, another alleged drug dealer. And this is where we get into it. The report reads that around 1992, Martin introduced Davis to Sean Puffy Combs. Davis recalls the introduction occurring at the Paradise nightclub on Santa Monica Boulevard. After speaking with Combs, Davis agreed to let Combs use his 1964 Chevy in a music video. The video featured artist Usher. After the vehicle was damaged during the production of the video, Combs paid $2,500 to have it repaired. And by the way, according to Davis, Combs was scared of Suge Knight, a man with a reputation for being violent and extreme. This moves us to the DEA report. There was a DEA report from a 2008 task force meeting with Davis that was also included as an exhibit in the motion. And in it, Davis talks about the murder of a man named G. Robel, Knight's bodyguard, who was killed in Atlanta in 1995. According to Davis, he heard a rumor that an associate of Combs had killed Robel. The report says Combs requested to speak to Davis and asked him if he thought it was safe for Combs to come to Los Angeles for a concert. Combs expressed his concerns about Knight and possible retaliation related to Robel's murder. Davis advised Combs to provide 40 or 50 tickets to the concert. Combs agreed, and Davis and his crew attended the concert in support of Combs. Davis recalls the concert took place in Anaheim, California. It was at this event that Combs began to solicit Davis to kill Knight and Shakur. Combs asserted something to the effect of, "I'll give anything for those dudes' heads." At a later date, Duane Davis, Eric Martin, Corey Edwards, Shock Holmes, and others met at Greenblatt's restaurant in Hollywood. While at the restaurant, Combs summoned Davis into the downstairs area. Combs again told Davis that he needed to get rid of Knight and Shakur. Combs offered Davis $1 million to handle the problem. Davis remembers Combs being very afraid of Knight. So after the car that Knight and Shakur were in was hit by a hail of bullets back in 1996, Davis says Combs wanted to know if that was the result of him allegedly putting out a hit on Shakur. The task force report states that, well, at the restaurant, Martin told Davis that Combs had called Martin and asked, "Was that us?" Davis asked Martin when he would receive compensation for the shooting, and Martin told Davis he would get the money when he returned to New York. Additionally, while at the restaurant, Combs called Martin again. Martin then handed the phone to Davis. Combs again inquired, "Was that us?" Davis recalled Combs sounding elated at the situation. Again, this is all allegations, but quite an accusation nonetheless. Now, Davis reportedly told the investigators that even though the job had been partially completed and Shakur was killed, Neither he nor Anderson ever got paid. He later revealed that he believes Combs paid the go-between, Zip Martin, who allegedly kept it for himself. So we mentioned a moment ago that an LAPD officer had recorded statements that Davis made in 2008. The state included a transcript of that interview in its filing, and in the transcript, we refers to Wayne Higgins. This is Davis's lawyer during the interview. Q refers to the questions, and the A's are Davis's answers. Okay, so he says, okay, now go on and ask whatever you want. Question, does Combs have a role in this? Answer, yes, I think he did. Question, did he play a role in this? Answer, yes, I think he did. And later in the interview, Davis said, yes, I think he did. And later in the interview, Davis said, yes, I wish I never met Puff Daddy. I swear to God. Question, why? Answer, he messed up my life, man. I was rich, living low-key, all that, and now it's all gone. Question, what about Combs' alleged involvement in the death of Biggie Smalls, whose legal name was Christopher Wallace? This was a big one. Smalls was killed in a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles in March 1997. You might be thinking, I thought they were friends, right? Anyone who followed this knows we did a whole sidebar on this, but Gene Deal, a former bodyguard for Combs who has recently started doing interviews and offering theories on Combs' alleged bad behavior, now says the rapper could have been involved in the killing of Biggie. Deal, who was reportedly Combs' bodyguard from 1991 to 2005, sat down for the documentary Diddy, the making of a bad boy that aired on Peacock, and according to him, Combs was acting strange in the lead up to Biggie's murder. He says in the documentary that during the week Biggie was murdered, Combs was acting very anxious and trying to get Biggie to go to this party. What was crazy was that Biggie was telling people he had to go to London, but Puff was telling people he wasn't going to London that week. Fast forward to the day of the party, and Deal says, I was sitting at the Beverly Hills Hotel and got a phone call around 9 o'clock. They said, Gene, get ready, we're going to the Vibe party. I was like, we're going to the party? We don't have any security. But according to Deal, he tried to warn Combs that it probably wasn't a good idea. He said, but according to Deal, he tried to warn Combs that it probably wasn't a good idea. One of us is going to get killed, bro. Combs asked, what? Deal said, yo man, if we go to this party tonight, one of us is going to get killed. Somebody's going to get killed. Somebody's going to die because now we got East Coast, West Coast beef. Combs said, yo, Gene, I don't want to hear that shit. So they all got in the car. I was in a car with Puff. Biggie was in his own car. And the next thing you know, you hear pow, 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 pow. Biggie was shot 4 times and died after arriving at the hospital. According to Deal, Combs showed up at the hospital and seemed shocked that Biggie was dead. We asked celebrity criminal defense attorney Brian McMonagle about this latest accusation against Combs, who is already facing 3 federal charges related to the so-called freak-off activity and dozens of civil lawsuits. Here's what Brian had to say. I don't see this. This is a 30-year-old accusation. It seems to me that it's getting to a point where Diddy is concerned, where it's dangerously getting to piling on in a way that I think might just help him. As I thought about this last night, once I saw the article in the Post and was referenced on the documentary, it seems to me that there are a lot of people now jumping on this bandwagon of making what I would say are baseless allegations against this guy. This one in particular just smells to me. Did this guy say any of this stuff over the past 30 years to anyone in law enforcement? Has there ever been any kind of suggestion that he was involved by law enforcement? It seemed to me that he was in a close relationship with Biggie and that, if anything, he was on the other side of this East Coast, West Coast fight. So the one thing I would say about it is just bringing this kind of full circle to this upcoming trial. They're going to be looking for things like this. The defense in this trial, they're going to be looking for accusations that are stretched. They're going to be looking for moments they can disprove. And make no mistake about it, there'll be a few things like that. And I hope that'll give them the kind of strength and ability to diffuse perhaps as many of these allegations as they can where this indictment is concerned. Now, to be clear about something, Combs has always denied any involvement in the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, and he certainly has not been arrested or charged in connection with their deaths in any way. As for Davis, we go back to him. It will be up to his attorneys to decide if they will appeal the judge's denial of their motion to the state Supreme Court. In the meantime, Davis has been denied bail, so he will be staying in a Las Vegas jail until his trial, which is scheduled to begin in March. We will keep an eye on the federal criminal case against Chan Combs in the Southern District of New York, where he faces charges of racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking through force, fraud or coercion of victim 1, and transportation for prostitution. The trial is currently scheduled for May 5th, 2025. I want to return to the indictment because this is where the focus really lies. The case against Chan Combs centers on allegations of sex trafficking and illegal activities known as freak-offs. The defense argues that 9 videos prove the sexual activities were consensual, particularly with victim 1, allegedly Cassandra Ventura. According to lawyers, the videos show private encounters between consenting adults with no evidence of violence, coercion, or human trafficking. Prosecutors oppose providing electronic copies of the videos to the defense, allowing viewing only at specific locations. The defense argues they need full access to properly prepare their case, citing the Brady Rule and Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 16. The case raises debates about victims' privacy versus the defendant's right to a fair defense. Prosecutors must prove these activities weren't merely consensual encounters, but involved coercion, violence, or illegal means for Combs' pleasure. We'll continue monitoring this high-profile case as it develops, bringing you the latest updates on this complex legal battle that could reshape how similar cases are handled in the future.